Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be back here at UCD. I've had a good relationship with UCD and the Planning School over a number of years. And I'm delighted to be back to celebrate the 50th anniversary of planning in the university as well. What I'd like to do in my 10 minutes is essentially talk about the theme of the 50th anniversary. Look at planning past, present and future, to look at essentially where planning has come from, what the challenges are today, and what the positive prospects are for planning tomorrow. I'm going to be provocative probably. I don't mean to embarrass my host, and I certainly don't mean to embarrass the minister, but I'm going to say things which might prove unpopular, but certainly challenging. And that's the point, is to challenge our orthodoxies, our views, and think about alternative ways that we can imagine planning, because essentially we need to if we make planning relevant for our needs. So it's about the sense of purpose and vision about having planning, not planning for its own sake, but it's there to do a job. And the question is, have we lost sight of that job? But we might as well start 50 years ago. I suppose it makes us realize how much we've changed, or maybe haven't changed that much. I always wanted to be a Dalek. I didn't want to be a planner at all. And 50 years ago, of course, it was a very pivotal time. Death of Churchill probably marked the end of one era or another. At the time of new fashions and new era, and UCD being at the heart of it, I'm sure. In planning terms, of course, it was also quite a radical change. We had the dawn of the rise of the car ownership affecting our cities and what they looked like, the rise of the white heat of technology, which changed current ways of thinking then. And we know the effect it had in some places about what the implication was. Of course, we needed to go through that phase in order to recognize perhaps what we valued, a bit too late in some cases, so conservation being come in. And it's worth saying in the 50th anniversary year that also Ken Loach's Cathy Come Home made a compelling story about housing need even 50 years ago, not today. If you think about planning today, then as we've heard the Minister say, there are issues about delivery of housing, of job creation. We use a wealth of tools that probably we always have used, including plans, spatial strategies, even increasingly European spatial strategies and European spatial visioning. Well, you will, we won't in the UK, of course. As well as land use planning documents that provide a context for what we do. The trouble is that we are obsessed with process. We're obsessed with procedures and how they fit together. We're obsessed with numbers and metrics and housing numbers. And we forget sometimes that there's a bigger purpose of having these initiatives at our fingertips, these tools. We become over-obsessed with process to the detriment of actually the value and purpose of having the tools at all. And it reflects, if you like, the messy world of planning, but also the messy world of government and the policy process, the danger of one ministry's policies cancelling out another ministry's policies because it affects places and as they are. In the meantime, the challenges that we face still carry on, either because of planning or sometimes despite planning. This is a worst case scenario for the British Isles in 2100, but it's worth saying that our cities rise and fall. So Shanghai, just 25 years apart in those photographs, and it affects everything that we do, even on other sides of the world. New economic sectors, Silicon Roundabout in London. Planning didn't foresee this. And the public feeling at odds, perhaps, not just with the democratic and political process, but maybe fed up with the ways that planning has to encourage them to intervene. We still are concerned about issues to do with the winners and losers in cities, and even in my home city of Newcastle, this is a metro map, but with life expectancies superimposed on it, it's still a relevant issue today. And at the time we have massive cuts in local authorities, certainly in the UK, with no public funding left in 2020 in Newcastle, it's an issue of concern. So what of the future? Blade Runner, perhaps, has been something we all strive for. This is a positive view of Newcastle. Or something doom-laden, that really we can't control it. It's beyond our hands, and we look forward to the Trump presidency. Or maybe we're concerned about which politician will try and lead us in the future and what agenda and vision they have. Given that complexity, given that messiness, I think it's time we started to rethink who has control, but also we come together and align our interests. The people are cynical about the rise of maybe the property sector and what it does. Maybe cynical about the rise of the politicians and governments and who they serve. There's got to be a different way that we bring the public into debate about change, because it's their future as much as the planning professional and politicians' future. In Newcastle, we started to think about something quite unorthodox in some ways. We're trying to combine different sectors and different issues into one prism. And through that prism, we're trying to look at the multiple beneficiaries, multiple sectors that we can harness to the advantage. At a time, of course, when there's very little in the way of the planning service left in the city. 1/3 of staff in the local authority have been made redundant. 40% of professional planners have lost their job. So who does the planning as we move forward as well? That means there needs to be a rise of a cooperative local authority that looks to other sectors to deal with some of these issues, whether that's looking back at science and embracing science into planning, not in a smart city for its own sake agenda, but smart and socially inclusive cities as we move forward. Think about the ways that young people use different forms of technology. And why doesn't planning embrace these sorts of things? It affects everything. Social media is a relevant question for planning. And we can use this even within the planning system. This is a project that we're doing using Apple Watch and smartphones to engage young people into debate about their own communities, to get them interested in democracy as much as anything else. We started off in Newcastle talking about our assets. And that meant going beyond planning. I don't expect you to see this diagram in any detail, but it has everything in it, from the number of people who live in the region, number of people employed in digital and tech, people employed in various scientific endeavours, the number of pounds spent in shopping every year, number of people using the transport system every year. All that reflects how we live today and possibly tomorrow. That is planning's purpose, is to deal with the management of the implications of these wider trends. They go way beyond planning, they go way beyond land use, but our tools are fixed into being obsessed with land use and not about how we live our day. I'm very taken with Terry Farrell's question for planners and the architecture community to have an urban room, a neutral space beyond the local authority, government, private sector, where people can come together to debate change because they want to have a voice in the process. And we tried that in Newcastle 2.5 years ago, setting up City Futures as a neutral space. I was bought out from the university to sit between municipal government, the universities, the private sector, and the public sector. And it's about how we recognise, if you like, the two knowledges that we have and how we can bring them together to shape conversations, but shape the future projects. And it's summed up quite neatly by my Vice-Chancellor, who says we need to stop thinking about what universities and schools are good at into what universities and schools are good for. What do the schools and the universities give back to the places in which they are located? We've set up City Futures. It is now funded by UK government and research councils, and it sits between 4 sectors, and that's probably why I look the way I do, because I'm forever trying to do bridge building between not just 14 groups, which we started with, but now 80. 80 different organisations coming to us rather than local authority because they want to have a free conversation about shaping the future of the city. And we've moved from having a conversation into starting to shape real projects. I've finally become a planner again after 25 years of just talking about it. And our projects are cross-sectoral. So homes, yes, but we're a demographically aging city. So the sort of housing we want is quite unique. Can we think about digitally enabled housing for the life course, which builds in sustainability issues, that has demonstrators all around the city, that can be used as a test bed to be scaled up for greater housing provision, which are embedded into the needs of the city. We're designing metro carriages for the Tyne and Wear Metro. Sounds a great project for kids, colouring in exercise. But the reality is we're an ageing city again. We have mobility and impairment issues. Can we therefore create bespoke metro carriages suitable for the needs of mobility across the city? A new high street, yes, let's try and get more shops and businesses to open on Northumberland Street, but let's make sure we embrace green and blue infrastructure. Let's ensure that we embrace digital online retailing on the high street, not in place of the high street. And all these, you see the different organisations involved in our fragmented environment. Someone has to broker all those parties to come to the table to make a difference in the city in which we're located. We're involved in the schools, getting them to build their future cities, because essentially that's what the kids will have, is what we will give to them. But can we do it through exciting ways, including digital technology? So we run a series of projects. And then above all, we're including digital and planning projects with the local authorities in the region to trial different things on brownfield mapping, on consultation exercises, neighbourhood planning, and even Twitter and Facebook in this, and being legitimate tools that encourage people to be involved. Well-being, health, this is my last example, and using art and culture in a part of the city to engage people. Look, notice the crossovers in each of these projects, very complex, but the issue is people have the appetite to do something, have the ambition to do it. Look at the planning system and say, actually, it looks a bit archaic of where the 21st century has taken us even now. So my provocation ends on these bullet points. I think it's time the planning addressed issues of the meaning of places as businesses and people experience them, not how the profession experiences them. We use planning skills, strategic thinking, innovative, and long-term processes. They're still very relevant, but they need to be shared as a conversation starter across the sectors. Yes, we need to provide the evidence base at a time when some governments are cynical about evidence and even experts. That still needs to be there, and maybe the universities can play a role in ensuring that happens. We need to think about planning being reconfigured towards the user's needs and the language that we use to embrace people into the system as well. And we allow maybe the need to create institutions of trust. And my provocation is, has government lost the trust of public and businesses? Has the public lost the trust of businesses anyway to be able to do the coordination role, to find those spaces of conversation? So my planning future uses all the skills and knowledge that we've built up over 50 years. All the tools of the trade are still very relevant today. But I would argue that we need some flexibility and hot footing. And that means that we can harness all the tools of the trade, but not necessarily produce a grand plan at the end of it. Thank you.